Sibling rivalry is nothing new. It goes all the way back to just after creation when we get the struggles between Cain and Abel. Now, the Cain and Abel story is interesting, for one, because they both bring exactly the same gifts. Well, they bring mincha in Hebrew, an offering. Their offerings were of different types, but in Hebrew it is the same word. Cain brings some of the fruits of the ground as the firstborn. Abel brings the first fruits of his flock. Now, I've heard it said that the reason that Abel's offering was accepted and Cain's offering was rejected is because Abel's was a blood sacrifice and Cain's was not. That's just simply not true. There are grain offerings accepted later on. These aren't sacrifices. The sacrificial system hasn't been put into place yet. And so using that just it was an animal, not vegetable sacrifice is the reason it was accepted. It just doesn't hold to the text. I do think there are some clues in the text as to why one was accepted and one wasn't. Abel offers the first fruits, the best of what he has, and Cain offers some of the fruits of the ground. Well, those first fruits for Cain had to go someplace, but they didn't go to God. So Cain is not making God the priority that Abel is. And God doesn't like to be mocked in that way. God wants to be a priority in individuals' lives. You can't just throw him a bone and think that's going to make God happy. Cain gets confronted by God about this. And the way God confronts him is interesting because God says, why are you downcast? If you do what's right, it'll go well. If you don't, sin's crouching at the door and ready to get to you. There are many theological interpretations that say following the fall, humanity is forever corrupted. That there is nothing, there's no way for us to avoid sinning in the course of our lives. But there at the very beginning of the story, God seems to imply to Cain that Cain has a choice. Cain can actually choose to do what's right or choose to do what's wrong. He doesn't have to fall prey to sin. Like Adam, he can make his own choice. But unfortunately, Cain's choice was to kill his brother. That was going to fix it, apparently. God confronts him, and ultimately God punishes him. Cain is exiled farther away from the garden, but he is allowed to live. I found that interesting, that though most people think of the Old Testament as that lex talionis, an eye for an eye, a life for a life kind of perspective, that when Cain has taken a life, God does show mercy. God does show grace and does not bring capital punishment. In fact, God forbids capital punishment to be used upon Cain. He puts a mark of protection on him, not as a sign of humiliation, but as a sign of protection. Cain is worried that whoever finds him is going to kill him because he's taken the life of his brother. We are not apparently supposed to ask who's going to find him, because up to this point in the story, we haven't been told of anybody else. There's Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, and then we don't have Abel anymore. Who's going to find him? His parents? Apparently not, because immediately Cain goes and marries. Who? Does he? Don't know. And builds a city that he names after his son. Who's living there? Where are all these people coming from? This is probably one of the first moments I get a lot of frustrating questions from students. This is even more frustrating than when did the dinosaurs come? Where did all these people come from? And the answer I have is going to sound a little bit flippant. It's going to sound a little bit like a cop-out, but I promise it's a deeply held theological position, even though it sounds like a cop-out. The reality is, it is not something the Bible thought was important enough to deal with. Now, that sounds like a cop-out, but what it really is saying is, the Bible has a story it's trying to tell. And the question of where Cain's family came from, there's a lot more the Bible could tell us. There's a lot more details that we could have. We could get the day-to-day workings of some of these people that happened before the flood, but we don't. The Bible doesn't care to talk about that right now. It has an agenda, a theological agenda, to talk about the relationship to God, and it's not something that we are ever going to, the Bible didn't imagine we're ever going to have a problem with this. At least the original authors didn't. So it's frustrating, but ultimately I come down to an I don't know on the Cain and Abel story where all the people come from.